All right, folks, let's get nice and bothered. um, as per usual, can anyone give me some sort of emote if my voice is okay and clear? Because as you know, Uncle Jack has, illi- you know, I don't know, like weird issues with anything electronic. All right, thank you, sir. Okay, we got one emote, two emotes. There we go. So, today's disclaimer, and our spaces always start with a disclaimer. We're going to be talking about more human topics. So nothing too abstract, nothing too mm, enigmatic, right? And we're going to be taking it slow. And this is probably going to be one of our last spaces within this format. I am, as you all know, if you're part of my group chat, um, I am planning to transition into sort of like long form videos and blog posts. They're a little bit easier to propagate. So we're going to have that. And then outside of that, I think I'm still going to do some spaces from time to time if I feel like sort of like having an informal yapping type of moment. But I know there are people like a cast of people who will resonate with this format specifically. So we're not going to lose it completely. But as you all know, as I've been spamming my Twitter feed, um, there is a very delicate moment in human history unfolding right now. And we all have the luxury, if you could call it that, the honor of attending these events as they unfold. Lots of chaos, lots of confusion, lots of loss of meaning and purpose. So everyone's going through a personal sort of depression now. If you're a sensitive and sensible, I guess, person, there's very little chance that you're not going through something very personal right now. And this one feels different than the rest. And I know it does, right? But you don't really talk about it. Um, so we're going to talk today about potentially addressing that, why it's there, and that sort of thing. So we talk about the collective consciousness and we talk about the collective subconscious and the unconscious a lot. As if you have followed my, what do I call them? Like, let's call them teachings. If you have followed my teachings or preachings or whatever, you should have by now understood that whatever supernatural or paralogical or um, em, enigmatic phenomena we experience as a collective being, right? That stems from a mental universal model. And I think if you have been observant and if you have been diligent in your studies, you will have gotten proof of that already. So we know that this is the case. Obviously, I haven't spilled the beans on everything, and there are some things that I just don't know. Obviously, I'm also human. Um, but generally, where we find ourselves is in a world where the collective consciousness impresses its own, well, impressions onto the consensus reality. And then there is also the element of there being a collective unconscious, which is avatarized by a what I call a super ego. Um, and I know I avoid using historical references and ideological references, because you naturally tend to move away from these things as you advance in consciousness. You no longer call these things their symbolic names, but I'm still going to say it for, again, for the sake of simplicity. And this, the disclaimer, I promise, will make sense in the grander scheme of, you know, dealing with personal, depression and grief and so on and so forth. Um, what the Gnostics would relate to is Yaldabaoth, right? Um, or what is known as the false light, or what is known as the collective ego of mankind. And keep in mind, okay, when we say ego, we mean something that is self aware. When we say void, right, or ether, we mean something that is largely not self aware. So keep that in mind as we explore this topic. Now, um, what the physical or etheric, even, depiction of this false light, this collective ego, is symbolically, like we said, it is a planet eclipsing a sun. The planet itself is black because we're looking at the dark side of that planet, the egoic expression. And then the light behind it is the divine creation that stands behind it. But the planet, the being itself, the ego itself, does not remember it. It is unaware of the light that is being cast from behind him, and he is reflecting this light as a planet and a plasmoid being. This depiction also coincides with physiognomy in the sense of, well, the physical manifestation of the human eye. This is why the eye is a very ancient symbol that carries immense meaning within the esoteric and occult traditions, of course, but also on an intuitive and symbolic level, you know, um, even in the physical realm. The eye is incredibly sensitive, and damaging an eye is associated with all kinds of pain and just suffering and so on and so forth. So, if you look at the eye, right? If you look at the blackest circle in the middle of it, okay, that is a depiction of egoic awareness. Now, what happens to this circle when awareness increases, right? And emotions increase, and the intensity of how we feel the physical material plane increases, right? Um, you can guess that, right? You can use your logic to discern that what happens to it. But there is a state where the light behind it, right? What we call the auric warmth or the electromagnetic imprint that is divined in the human eyes, right? It is sort of like a physical representation of this process again. So humans, in our design, we are also, in a sense, a false light, right? We understand that there is an integral act or spark of creation that lives within us. And we also understand that we belong to a rather holographic universe where we are vessel homes for these, um, you know, creative beings, right? So the eyes depict that from, well, one from the front and one from the back, creating a 360 torus shape, like a toroidal shape, if you combine them together. And it depicts the electromagnetic imprint of these energies at play. So, because what we said about on our previous spaces about the, oh, actually, it wasn't on our previous spaces, it was on a blog post. I should talk about this. This is sort of like NDA info. But, well, keeping in mind, let's just say it like this, keeping in mind the mentalism of the mental nature of this universe. And when I use the word holographic, I don't want it to sound like, oh, it's fake or an illusion or some sort of matrix. We've already explained that in the past. um when we understand the parallel, right, that we can draw here, we understand very quickly that each individual human being is an egoic expression of some sort of archetypal electromagnetic etheric energy. And that energy type is depicted, well, firstly through the color, shape, formation, size, whatever, of the eyes. And then the egoic awareness that overlaps um, this this grand creative awareness, this grand consciousness, reflecting its light, um, is the egoic awareness, signified by the black void in the center. Now, why is this important? Why is this relevant? Right. Well, this is relevant because there must be, if you look at Jung, right, and his theories and so on and so forth, there must be some sort of archetypal symbolic meaning or archetypal knowledge or wisdom or a set of laws at least from which the philosophers and the researchers of old um, probably determined and became inspired by, right? um, the concept of the shadow, right? Or the concept of duality, or the concept of ego, or the super ego, or the identity, or the meta identity, right? These concepts didn't just fly out of thin air. So, of course, when you are an observant seeker and a mystic, because that is what a mystic is at the end of the day. It is someone who is observant and acts accordingly, but a seeker is someone who doesn't act, but they can also be observant. Obviously, there is mythology behind these philosophies and these research that they have provided us, right? And well, if you look into it in a conspiratorial sense, of course, there is some, you know, um, very well kept knowledge that was distributed among these, great thinkers of old, right? Because it's almost like, if we're honest with one another, it's almost like they're all using the same playbook, so to speak. So they must have gotten it from somewhere. Now, spirituality is a very strange thing, where um spiritual advancement doesn't necessarily mean the acquisition of esoteric knowledge, but the acquisition of esoteric knowledge does not mean spiritual advancement as well, right? So sometimes it's strange when certain types of people come out with certain types of knowledge, which are very obviously they're not supposed to hold. So okay, whatever. Back to our topic. So primarily, we have an archetypal understanding of, well, what the human being is and how it functions. You have an egoic expression, you have egoic awareness, and then you have this egoic awareness which is overlaid on top of your grander awareness of which you are not aware of because you are experiencing your life in this three-dimensional plane through egoic awareness. And why is this necessary? Well, it's very necessary because the very idea and the very fact of individuation depends on you experiencing egoic awareness in a state of separateness. So, because you're in a state of what's wrong? What's wrong with me? Because you're in this state, um, you must also block yourself from the wisdom and the knowledge you would have innately by default, if you were to know what you currently don't know. So you not knowing is basically what keeps you together as an individual, right? Now, where I'm from in the Caucasus, there are many stories, right? This is, mythology, and obviously not a real life story, but where the the um, the seers and shamans were, the locals of these shamanic tribes, right? They Some of them were gifted with the ability to know things and to speak with nature and to speak with animals and so on and so forth. And they acquired this knowledge, right? By very often, um, infiltrating, demonic forts, or ending up somehow hostage in these demonic forts, and um, partaking in the consumption of um, the snake flesh, right? And symbolically, of course, the serpent depicts knowledge, but not just any kind of knowledge, not just any kind of knowing, right? But it's forbidden knowledge. Um, and it also implies a self consumption, right? Um, and cold bloodedness. So, because by consuming the flesh of the serpent, these seers would become knowing in the ways of nature and in the language of the beasts and animals that inhabit it. And there's always a very human, almost cynical twist to these stories. Um, and most of them end up with them being unable to live a human social life. Well, because there's one story, for example, where this man who is sort of like a war hero, and also a husband, right? Can't chop trees anymore because the trees are asking him, please, don't do it. We feel the pain too. We want to live. Don't chop us up. Well, he can't chop trees anymore, right? Well, he can't kill animals anymore, right? Because he knows that they also belong to a common consciousness, a common source, right? That makes them sort of kindred spirits, right? He can't harm animals anymore. He can't consume their flesh, right? So he can hear the 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 secrets and the stories the wind brings, right? And so on and so forth. And he's unable to function as a human in a human society. He's no longer able to function. And others, when they see their gifts, they will often try to exploit them somehow, in the sense of, well, maybe tell us where the enemy is encamped, right? And then he can do that. The seer, this is what he does, right? He can ask the wind or the grass or the or whatever, right? Or the birds, right? That type of thing. So the sort of like the understanding of illusory power, or the holding of forbidden knowledge, and this goes back to the story of Adam and Eve, even, right? Is that knowledge is forbidden not because you are not meant to know it, but because your very existence as an individuated being rather depends on it. Does it not? That is why the knowledge is forbidden. Because if there are if there are things that you would know now, your egoic self would rather quickly dissipate, and we don't want that, because um, you are here in this realm to understand this realm and experience the quote unquote illusion of this realm from a limited perspective of yourself. Because what the egoic mind is, it is not something that requires destruction, but it is an eggshell, so to speak, a new consciousness, a new ID, so to speak, is is born through the transmutation of the egoic self, not its dissipation. So, if we know that this is true on an individuated human level, we can also assume that this is also true on a collective level. So, the collective ego of mankind, right? the father figure of all gnosis, right? Yaldabaoth, you could call it, right? The false light, so on and so forth. That is also something that requires a collective transmutation in order for a new god to be born, right? So it's interesting when you look at it from that perspective, because we all give birth to new identities. Our individuated self, our self that has forgotten its grander architecture, because of its limited perspective, can give birth to something new, and something unique, right? Um, you cannot kill a god. I always like to say, right? You cannot kill a god, but you can make him forget that he ever was one. It's a very similar effect to this, right? When you understand that if you if you could chop a part of your consciousness right up and make him forget 70% of all the things you know, and you left that 30% to, let's say, fend for itself, so to speak, right? And the mind can do this at times of great trauma and depression, right? That 30% will eventually build itself back up again to its full form, because even a shattered mirror or a broken mirror, you can put it back together if you study all the pieces well, right? If when it gains self-awareness. So our stories are rather the same. You know, you have a sort of an idea about who you are from your ambitions and your desires and the things you wanted to do or wanted to be as a child, or the talents and the gifts that you have, or these gifts that you have inherited somehow, right, from the fragmented whole of your higher being. Um, you will reconstruct yourself back, but I will tell you a secret: it won't be the same self, right? Because your inability to experience yourself in your fullness gives you a sort of a new or unique perspective. So something new is born, right? Something new is born. And because something new is born through this, the fragmentation process of the consciousness, we understand that there is also a law to this procession. So each movement or each reaction, as it reverberates in the larger quantum cosmic field, has a sort of like a feedback loop or a feedback system, right? And then the creation that comes from even further fragmenting that already fragmented mind, that will also sort of like work its way back and repair itself to fullness. But again, it won't be the absolute same image. So this is how new creation is introduced into the world of the living, so to speak, and the etheric and the astral, right? um, all each layer with its own respective complexities, of course. But okay, how does this relate to depression and grief? And I promised we would talk about human topics. It relates to depression and grief because when you understand that you experience yourself from a limited perspective of, well, who you are and where you are, and you don't know where things are going. Um, especially when you are sensitive to the collective trauma that humanity is experiencing, well, quite literally as we speak, and as we've been experiencing for, basically the whole of our history, our collective history. You understand that it is an integral part of being human, to experience moments of grief and shame and depression and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about what depression is and what grief is as well soon. But bear with me here for this very extensive disclaimer or whatever. Um, it's important to teach yourself that the absence of depression, right, or the illusion of the absence of depression in another person's life who was at some point probably suffering from it and then gave up on it, is a negative behavioral template. Um, the wrongdoers, the evildoers, the liars and the thieves and so on and so forth. These are people who rage against reality. And when do you rage against reality? When you feel victimized by it, right? When you feel like you have very little agency. And usually the prerequisite for this sort of you know behavior and lifestyle is heavy depression. And also why these types of people will very often have some sort of relationship with drugs or heavy smoking or heavy alcohol consumption and stuff like that, because these are all coping mechanisms. So why I'm telling you this is that there are ways of experiencing yourself in a state of depression or grief, and then there are ways of avoiding yourself in a state of depression and grief. um, Most people choose avoidance, um, because what depression realistically is, it is something as simple as lack of or loss of purpose and meaning in life. If you've ever been truly depressed, like I know some people who have said like, "Well, oh, I'm so depressed like this week or whatever," and then they actually get depressed. Um, in the futures, 2, 3, 4 years after, and they're like, wow, like I never thought, like I thought I was depressed when I thought I was depressed. But depression apparently is something like completely different. It's almost like a physiological, chemical, emotional, spiritual imbalance, right? With it's like a sort of incompatibility with reality itself. And it's very crippling. It's very, very crippling. It's crippling in a sense where sometimes you don't even want to wake up, right? Like you just woke up, and the very fact that you woke up, right, is a burden. It's heavy, right? So if you've spoken with someone with let's say clinically diagnosed depression, they will tell you that their their reality is overwhelmingly that, right? They will tell you that their reality is sometimes you're hungry but you don't even want to lift up a spoon, right? um, that's the degree to which depression can immobilize you, right? So um, I know that many of you, and um, generally, like many people across the globe, are experiencing one way or another some sort of depressive episode now, because it's impossible for a person not to, again, with the collective struggles that are going on. And you can either unplug yourself or pretend to unplug yourself, or you can experience the full you know the bruntness of this global phenomena, right? um, and how to go through that is um, it's gonna sound funny, but slowly, right? Mm, how you get through depression is through realignment of perspective. So, because you're experiencing a loss of purpose, a loss of meaning in the sense of why should I even get up today? Right? Like, why should I even do anything? Why should I address this or that health issue? These are all negative things about my life, and I don't want to be doing them. And props to you, because in many ways you could be right. In many ways you could be, well, what's the point, right? um if there is no grander ideal, if there is no grander goal or purpose, then what is the point of me achieving this seemingly trivial, objective in life, that is associated with all kinds of negative emotions, right? With all kinds of, the boredom and hesitation and the, um, when you're in this state, you have to admit to yourself kind of that, like, you have a good point, and people are usually afraid of that, like people are usually afraid of like agreeing with their depression, right? But you have a pretty good point. And if you are able to maybe allow yourself to just understand this side of you, you'll be able to go into a state of a back and forth of sorts with your inner self, like a conversation. If you escape this part of yourself, it's going to become second nature, right? um, and it's going to sponsor or end up sponsoring all kinds of like deviant and self-deprecating behaviors in your life. This is how the subconscious program is formed, that creates like a high degree of anxiety and a high degree of trauma, and just like a general, how to say, um, mm, it creates like this striving almost to negative towards negative outcomes. So let's admit that when you're depressed, or when you're grieving for a loss, or when you're misaligned with your purpose, when your egoic mind or your egoic self that doesn't want to be concerned with any of it has a really good argument. That's number one, right? You have a good point, right? And the second argument to that is the argument of choice, right? Um, and this is now where we get a little bit more critical of ourselves, right? Um, Once you've established that you have a serious competitor in the sense of your egoic self, you also have to establish that at the end of the day, it's still a choice to be depressed or not to be depressed. And I'll tell you how it is a choice. There are significant physiological aspects to depression, going all the way down to diet, or getting enough sunlight, right? Or just being physically active. These are all undeniable elements of, sort of like the plethora of aspects that form depression as a whole, like as an experience. But this doesn't mean that the overarching narrative, or the overarching notion, or the overarching sentiment, I should say, isn't you choosing to not address these things. So, becoming aware that these changes need to be made, you already have an upper hand on the situation, right? So when someone comes to me and they'll tell me, "Well, Uncle Jack, I'm depressed, and this and this is my problem. Like both of my parents passed away, and my girlfriend left." Right? And these stories are relatively common, and obviously, like I have empathy. I feel bad for those people, right? I feel a genuine sort of like heartbreak, so I share it with them, so to speak. um and it's not like I can tell them, "Oh, just get over it," or like, "Oh, use this as an opportunity to, I don't know, whatever," right? Use what as an opportunity? You know what I mean? Like, they'll think you're crazy. But what I do tell them very often is that you can choose your way out of it. And it's true. And no one likes to hear it. Everyone wants to hear something else. Everyone wants to hear some sort of story or a scenario or whatever. But all they need, truly, all you need to bring someone out of a state of depression is a perspective change. It just so happens that these people receive their perspective change only, like, very rarely on their own, and or only when they approach death. I knew a person, for example, not a beneficiary of mine, but you know someone that I knew, who was incredibly suicidal, and incredibly depressed, not medicated, for the most part. By the way, this is also a big deal, because medication sometimes can backfire, blah blah blah. You know how it is. But um, they tried to basically end it, like, probably about like 15 or 20 times, right? And they would always be saved in some sort of way, right? There's someone would notice, da da da. Like, obviously, people knew the situation. But once they managed to actually swallow a whole bunch of pills, and they were dying, right? um, and they were at the twilight stage of just passing over, right? When again, miraculously somehow, they were saved. Shoved them in a truck, took them to a hospital, cleaned their body out, right, and they survived. Um, and they never attempted it again. So when I asked them, like, well, what was different, like what was different, compared to this time, th- with all like 19 of the other times, right? Like, why did you stop now? And you know what they said? They said, this time, I I really thought I was going to die. Like, I was so close to actually dying. And they said, and the moment I was I thought I was going to die, and that I was like, that's it. They said, I realized that I didn't want to die at all. They were like, yeah, the moment I was dying, I was like, I didn't want to go. Like, that's when I realized that I just didn't want to go. So their perspective change came at the absolute final moment, right? But just notice the like symptomatically, like functionally, notice what changed, right? Between lack of purpose and incredible anguish and torment that would probably drive a person to try to take their own life, right? It's an immense, like a Herculean amount of inner suffering. And all it took was a realignment or inner reconfiguration of perspective. And that perspective change was, I don't think I actually want to go. So, what was the trigger of that? Well, the trigger of that is the imminent, right? The imminent threat of your life ending, right? I'll tell you another story, and you can like come to your own conclusions, right? Personally, I love coming to my own conclusions. It makes me feel smarter than I am. I'll tell you another story. I had this one case, when where we were working with, a person who was a mother, and they were suffering from severe depression. Their parents had passed away, combined with grief as well, right? Like I told you, common story. And they had two kids to take care of, single mom. So again, heavy burden. And income was terrible. Life, like you can imagine, right? All kinds of terrible. And I worked as a sort of a, actually I won't tell you because you know confidentiality, but I'll just tell you the story like in an overall sense. Um, and she basically came to us and she said, I can't do this anymore. I've already decided I want to put my kids, eh, into adoption, right? And obviously, like the other end of that is like I'm in no shape to do anything. I'm probably basically going to end it soon. And the psychologists who were working that case, came to me and they were rather distraught, right? Because they couldn't get this lady to basically like reconsider, right? And obviously the kids weren't like you know too young, so they would suffer the consequences of that as well. The wound of abandonment would have been great. And these were relatively experienced professionals, right? But they came to me distraught, um because they just couldn't figure it out, right? um and it's funny because I feel like as a psychologist, you should be able to figure these types of situations out. So basically, I suggested them to let her win, right? They're like, wait, what do you mean? Well, I say, um, let's call that lady right now. And, they had me call them. And I told her, like, You we agreed to your demands or whatever. We agreed to the deal. But I have only one requirement. She says, "Well, what is the requirement?" And I say, "Well, the requirement is tomorrow we'll get in a car. We'll put your kids in a car. You'll go with us. We will go through all 15 of these adoption homes together, right? And then you will decide which one you want to put the kids in, right?" So we get in the car, we joke around a little bit, we drive around the city, we go, we, visit all the places, right? Um, Days over, emotional moment, whatever. Suddenly she doesn't want to give the kids away anymore. Right? So mm, you need to put yourself, like what I'm trying to tell you here is you need to put yourself against the most imminent result of your depression, right? Whatever threatens you on the other side of it. If you want a genuine fix to your depression, that's the fix. Because what makes you more depressed than the depression itself is waiting. The interval between what you think is coming and what hasn't come yet, so to speak. So if you want to handle your depression, and but again, I mean the actual like real depression, well, firstly, you have to come to terms with it that it's real. You have to say, well, I'll tell you what, my egoic self has a very good point, right? There is a loss of purpose. There is a sort of like a negative consensus reality around us. There are these rather unfair and unjust and terrible things that are going on around us every single day. You would be a fool to ignore that, and some people are fools to ignore that. But if you are not, and you understand that outside of your belief systems and your quantum existence and your quantum aura, there is a consensus field of objective reality that we are all experiencing together, right? Which is also through our choice, but a collective choice. You also understand that there are some things that you cannot escape, regardless of how a high consciousness you are or high vibration, whatever these new age people call it, right? Um, Whatever state you're in, you can't escape it. Um, so you have to sort of come to terms with it. You have to be able to accept it. And then once you've accepted this, then you can and go to the ultimate end of your depression. What is the ultimate end point of my depression? Again, like I'll give you guys another example. I posted about this a while back. If you want to study the destiny or the fate of a person, right? All you have to do is take a single behavior, right, that they show, that they display very frequently. So, for example, um, I have a friend who gets irrationally angry all the time and physical because of it. Okay. So let's say take this behavior, which is a very confirmed behavior that they're displaying quite regularly and frequently. And imagine in your mind uh, 10 like variations, like 10 versions of your friend. Okay, like it's not one person anymore, there's 10 of them. And now put your friend, all 10 of your friends in one room with nothing in it. In your head, just do a little mental experiment. So put these 10 people, who are all the same people, all of them are your friend with anger issues, and replicate and simulate the behavior. But now, as you're simulating the behavior in this room, remind yourself that there's 10 of these people in there. So, whatever behavior they do or display in this isolated state will be exacerbated further and further. And it will, spiral out of control, of course, and it will effectively, um, you'll see its end point rather quickly, right? So if there's 10 people in a room who cannot control their emotions and therefore get physically violent with one another, what's going to happen to that room? It's very simple, right? So you can look at a person's behavioral template and then do this little mental thought experiment, and you can sort of understand what their destiny is, what their eventual fated end looks like. And the fated end for, my friend with anger issues, looks like probably their inability to live with their own selves, right? Someone who's very angry and jealous and so on and so forth, replicate that behavior tenfold, a hundredfolds, put them in a room with themselves and see what their fated end is, because that's what they're going. Because at the end of the day, our universe is a mirror of consciousness. It is a mirror, it is a perfect mirror of consciousness. It's just through time, it has a delaying effect. It's not a caricature of it's not a caricature of a person's shortcomings, so to speak. There's more complexity to it. But when we're talking about the eventual end of someone who experiences life on that, with that template or blueprint of behaviors, that is unique to them, that's where they're going. So you have to look at yourself the same way, because we think there's a lot of time between us and that moment of death, right? And some people are delivered from their own depression because that moment comes prematurely. And only then they realize that if there is no change of perspective, if there is no shift, so to speak, in the way these things are perceived, they will end up in a very regretful state, right? Regretful not in the sense of like, oh, it's so bad that it happened. Regretful in the sense of like they will quite literally regret, not having tried or not having done different things differently, and so on and so forth. Not to scare people off with regret, but it's just objectively true most of the times. So when you dissolve into when you sort of like dive into the understanding of like how these things form in your mind, right, and what it takes to break yourself out of that thing, it becomes very simple. It's not about like drugs or fixing lifestyle or da, da, da. Like different things work for different people, but when we're talking about the highest form of depression, right, we need to consider it from not from sort of like a clinical viewpoint, but from a mental viewpoint. What mental shift of perspective, what sort of realignment needs to occur in the mind for the person to face the thing at the end of their depression, right? um, and once you've done that, I promise you, you won't be super inspired to maybe to get out of bed or whatever, but you will understand that there are two choices, right? And it's still a choice that you make at the end of the day. One choice is what your illusory understanding of, if I am experiencing great torment and anguish and pain, I can just cease to exist and I can, put an end to it, right? Which is technically not true, even though it might sound true to the person like experiencing the suffering, because you won't be ceasing the suffering because you would be ceasing yourself, right? So how would you be ceasing the suffering if you're ceasing yourself to your own existence, right? So a very good understanding of how to get yourself to that point is to just be pragmatic about it and to achieve a pragmatic state. This is why if you take 10 people to a psychotherapist, right, let's say, um they'll laugh at you guys seen that video where they ask these therapists like, hey, how many people have you cured, and they just laugh it off because like they're convinced that like there is no cure for whatever these people are experiencing, because these drugs and so on and so forth, they don't really cure depression, right? They just dampen the effects, right? Like the symptoms and stuff like that. But if you actually want to cure depression, you have to get real with it, right? And getting real with it is associated with all kinds of pain, right? How to deal with grief and loss, same way, the same way. Isolate yourself in that room. What is what lies at the end of your grief, what lies at the end of your loss. I've grieved for many things, right? I've regretted things. I've lost loved ones and so on and so forth, and it is an inescapable wound. But because that wound is sort of like it becomes a part of who you are, you sort of carry it with you at all times, and it becomes, well, why we call this spaces what we called it. It becomes a vestige, right? It becomes a sort of a totemic reminder of where your gentleness comes from, where your wisdom comes from, things like that. If you can get yourself to a state where you can take 10 of you in a room, and in eventuality you won't destroy yourself or yourselves, right, with your most frequent behaviors, you probably have something to celebrate. You probably have something to celebrate. I live with, the other 10 me's in my head. And I have conversations with them all the time, right? A little bit nutty, but you would be surprised to experience the full extent of what kind of mental reframe your mind can do. It's incredible. Your mind can be a wondrous place, and you can have these different rooms that exist within the temple of your mind, and these rooms allow you to access new perspectives about yourself. These experiment rooms that you can create in your brain, right? So what is acceptable there is not perfection. What is acceptable there is not having done everything right or whatever. What is acceptable there, between the two options, and one option being just becoming an evil, you know, hag, right? Or an evil uncle type of person and just raging against life, which is never an option. It's just basically like something you do when you've given up on life, right? And when you start to rage against the game, so to speak. You ever played a video game like that you just can't beat or whatever, and like maybe you play with other people like multiplayer and you're underperforming or something like that, and you get really angry, and then what do? Like you rage at the game, and you try to sort of like, yeah, break the rules and ruin it for other people. It's the same thing like that option is, and it's never a good option. So you should probably reconsider it. Of course, it's your choice still. You know, you have the capacity to cast that choice, but it's not the best choice, not the most efficient choice. And then the other choice is get yourself into a state where you can at least coexist with yourself in that room, and then start to have a conversation, right? Uh, if your inner state is not one of eventual destruction, you've already done incredible work, especially in these trying times, right? Because the consensus reality, it impresses all kinds of negative thought patterns and self-deprecating programming and so on and so forth through incredible means, through television and internet and propaganda, and people being a certain way, and visuals, and lack of beauty and beautiful display in life. So if you can achieve that, you're already achieving a lot. So if you were to ask me, well, what's the cure for depression? That's the cure for depression. And I understand it's not direct, it's still rather abstract, but you have to really think about it. Like, you really have to consider what I'm giving you in that sense. Where if you do fall into depression, you have to understand that it's a good argument. Um, and then if you fall into grief and loss, that's also a good argument, right? When your mind says, well, what's the point of life if, my wife of, 17 years left me, or something along those lines, right? So many men will tell you, oh, you don't be pathetic, you can just move on, da da da. But all of that takes time to achieve the mental reframe. um, you can't just force yourself into a better mood. That's when men go into escapism, and they end up being, becoming, you know, truly pathetic, truly pathetic. And you don't want that for yourself. What you want for yourself is to properly heal from from the experience. And how you properly heal is by, well, facing yourself and understanding that, hey, like, this is as terrible as I am experiencing it, and rejecting it won't do much for me. Um and as it is that terrible, I can now become aware of, like, I can choose to either hold this as a vestige of my promotion into the new me, into the formation of, or we should we say, the transmutation of our past identity into a new identity or a new consciousness, right? Or I just allow it to consume me. But obviously, the better option there is always, like, it never really goes away. So if you've experienced something incredibly traumatic, I've had a few very traumatic experiences in my life. Some were very physical in nature, like material in nature, like, physical pain and suffering. Others were mental anguish or spiritual anguish, right? And I can't sit here and tell you that, oh, I took this pill and that pill and I just completely recovered from it and I've forgotten about it and it doesn't bother me at all. That would be a lie, right? But what I can tell you is that these are not things that define my current identity. So let's say I don't identify as a person with my loss. I don't talk about my loss all the time. I don't refer to my loss as the primary event that happened in my life, and stuff like that. But I do hold it as, like we said, a vestige of of who I am and why I became that. Right? That can deliver you from the evils of depression. That can deliver you from the evils of grief. That can deliver you from, these very difficult states, um, you know, very devious states, right? And again, how you do that is achieving the mental reframe, and that takes time, and you have to respect that. You need to watch yourself unfold, right? If I'm drinking myself to death, right, or something along those lines, right, it is a way for me to escape the harrowing reality of my life. If I dramatize it, in that sense, again, like, put 10 of me in a room and we'll be dead in a week, right? That type of thing. So your goal is to get yourself to that point where you're not dead in a week. Okay, like, you can in eventuality go on. And once you achieve that, then you can really face sort of, like, well, the pain and so on and so forth. It's not easy. And if it was easy, a lot of people would do it. Like, many people would do it. It's not easy. And you don't get bored of depression. I've heard that before as well. Like, oh, like, just leave him be, and, like, he'll get bored of it. And you don't get bored of it because it's a program is running in the background regardless of how you feel about it. If you launch a program on your computer, like, maybe it's exciting, maybe it's not exciting, maybe it just runs in the background, but it just is running, you know? So a lot of people who haven't experienced, like, or observed someone who is in deep depression will find it very difficult to understand why they can't just snap out of it, so to speak, right? But then eventually, like, they'll also get into a state of depression, which, like, some people get in, like, the latter stages of their lives, right? And they just won't know what to do with it, right? Because it's never hit them before. When you are, let's say, a spiritual seeker, obviously depression and grief and so on and so forth, I feel the grief for the world on a daily basis. It hits you a little bit differently, right? Depression also hits you a little bit differently. But you have to understand that you shouldn't manage it, you should probably face it. So um, your purpose rather becomes the very short next step, right? Instead of your purpose being this unreachable goal of, like, oh, just don't be depressed, right? Your purpose should probably be, what is the next logical step, because you can still choose no matter like what you're feeling. You will never lose your ability to choose, and that's the one thing you can't bullshit yourself about. Okay. The one singular thing you can't bullshit yourself about is that no matter how bad you feel, no matter how exhausted you are, no matter how sorry you feel for yourself, like how much physical pain there is, you still have the ability to choose. And you can choose the next short step that takes you to like a better place, or you can not choose. It's a matter of choice. Like I gave you the example, right? It's about the change of perspective. It's about the mental reframe. And if you can achieve it, you can beat uh, depression down, where you will bury it in a positive sense, and it will become a vestige of your progress, your past progress, um, and it will shape who you are now, right, into someone who has overcome that, and you should celebrate that. Um, and yeah, do the mental experiment, do the thought experiment, like really do it, like, and do it often, right? Be like, hey, okay, like if I feel like this, multiply that. What's that end up in, and do it for other people as well, like if you want to know how to help someone, right? If someone's constantly nagging about how unfortunate they are, and that they have bad luck or bad fortune, just like put 10 of them in a room and see what happens, right? That's where they're going. They just don't know it. Get it? But if you allow them to see their eventual end of like where they're going, they will very quickly realize that they don't want to be there, most likely. And that's it. You've won. So I don't know what it is about the inevitability of death, or like the threat of just like a bad ending, that allows people to shift perspectives, but and what keeps them from doing so before they achieve this point, like when they're heavily depressed. But it's the only thing that I have seen, at least in my experience, consistently work, right? um to reverse the effect, right? And quite like with quite a confidence as well. I feel like it's a problem of the imaginative function. I feel like it's a problem with a little bit of a delusion from being a little bit deluded in terms of like reality, right? The reality of your depression. I think that's a very big element, because they feel like their depression is leading them somewhere that they can't really like put into thoughts or ideas or whatever. But as soon as they're faced with it, like with the reality of it, they understand that there is an inherent negative outcome for them, right? At the end of it. So I don't think it's as much of a philosophical question or a physiological question, as like, of course it has these elements, the significant elements, but I think more so it's a problem of not understanding, fully grasping the consequences, right, and the end result of their ways. So there you have it, a little bit like different, usually from how people would like, what kind of advice people could give for depression. And I understand that like there's a plethora of advice, and some might work, some might not, some might work to a certain extent or whatever, with depression, and most of them are like very heartwarming, right? I don't think mine is that heartwarming, to be honest, right? But it's functional and it's effective. And if you really want to deal with it, like from a pragmatic sort of cold blooded stance, like this is how you do it, and you just go and sort of like face the end result of it, and see if you like it. Like just try to imagine the end result of that and see if that's what you really want to choose. At the end of the day, it is a choice, guaranteed. Don't choose a life instead, just choose something else, you know like don't choose like, oh, you have to go and start going to the gym, and that's difficult, man. That's difficult for someone who's going through like clinical depression. But what you can do is at least choose the things that or don't choose the things that make it worse, right? And that's a good step. That's a really good step. Like, like if you if you're very angry, right? If you like if you shake a bottle of Coke, right? Um, if you open it up like real quick, it's gonna explode in your face, right? Um, but when you know like when you've shaken it like you know that you have to open it slowly and gradually. Same thing with anger. Like when you're angry, right? Like you just need time so the anger dissipates. If you're angry and just act on the anger in the moment, yeah, you're probably going to do something regrettable. So you need to buy yourself a little bit more time for the anger to slowly dissipate, right? If you open the bottle slowly, it's going to dissipate. Same thing with depression, right? You can't go from, oh, today I'm depressed and I can't get out of bed, and tomorrow I'm going to be in the gym. Like you can't do that. I mean, great if you can in the sense of like a mental reframe, but there are not many people who are equipped with the consistent willpower, right, to just power through those very difficult, steps. So how you do it is at least choose or don't choose the lethal option, the option that's going to get you destroyed or killed, right? Just doing something about it is good enough if you stay consistent with it, right? And then you'll just up the frequency and so on and so forth. So that's how I would deal. I don't remember who gave me this question, but I remember someone asked me to talk about depression. This is what I can tell you about depression. This is definitely how I would deal with it, and understand that there are several layers to your persona as well. It's not just you. There's the egoic self, right? There's your identity, your current identity, right? Then there's the greater self, the greater identity, the grandiose self, right? And all of these things that they have an interplay with with one another, and you're just a small formation, right, of the grander design that is you. So don't come under the thrall of what you are feeling and experiencing now as if it's like the primary mode of existence, because it's not. Like for you, I mean, like it's not like how you feel is not your primary mode of existence. So your emotions are just messengers, and they're sort of providing you some sort of context on how your ego is dealing with reality at large, right? um so yeah, remember that. But yeah, okay. Hope no one's depressed. If you are, totally fine. Address it. Choose the other thing. I know you can do it. You can do it. So much love to everyone. I think the next thing we do, it's not going to be a spaces anymore. It's going to be sort of like a video. I'm going to put it on my YouTube. Obviously, I'm going to share it on my Twitter as well. And we're going to shift a little bit with the format because there are some long form stuff that I want to propagate over the internet, and I can't do it through spaces. A lot of people have like advised me to do it the other way, so I'm going to do it the other way. The big stuff coming like this year, 2026. I'm not talking about global events. I'm talking about, well, obviously myself and the people around me. Um, um, Obviously, like the larger, the greater sentiment is the world is going to be one big distraction this year. This year, the world is going to be incredibly convincing, right? In its problems, it's going to be incredibly convincing. And if you are not building, if you are not creating actively this year, um, it would be some sort of mistake. So make your home a beautiful place, like we say. Build your spaceship. There's going to be, I'll tell you one more thing, guys, and it's not relevant to the space, but I'll still say it. Um, when we shift these quantum portals, what happens is that it's a strange thing that I can't fully explain. But what happens is that um, the windows to the higher states of being, they become thinner, and like they narrow almost. They are people or places, okay, um, and they become less empowered and more disempowered. So I'm talking health issues. I'm talking uh, uh, material problems. I'm talking just less presence, just less physicality, just less space. It's a strange thing. Like, because if you align with a higher timeline, it's almost like you're also disobeying the consensus reality of this timeline. And because you're disobeying it before you can actually start to become and create the portal to the higher timeline, you get really disempowered in this timeline, because you're not aligned with it. You're aligned with somewhere else. So you don't have any sort of great influence, or the algorithm on your side and stuff like that, and like what people would call fortune on your side. So just understand that the windows are still there, but they're thinning, right? So we either create more windows, right, and align with a higher timeline or higher state of being, right, or we can get consumed in the happenings and the occurrences of the one we're currently inhabiting on a collective level, right? It's a little bit, it's going to be rather difficult to maintain uh, you know a healthy, sane disposition, but we have to do it, and that's why we build our spaceships. That's why we make our homes, beautiful temples that ground us in our own energy, remind us like where we are, what our mission is, so on and so forth. That's why we create these little capsules, because they're going to carry us through all of these insane quantum shifts that are happening right now on a collective consciousness level, right? And they're going to carry us through it. Just don't get sucked into it. Like, it's so difficult, but that's what's going on this year. You have to be building and creating um, more of what you want to see in this world, and stop reacting to the actions and the decisions of others. I know it's again, like we say, it's going to be so convincing to get you to pick a side and get engaged, and, and then suddenly you're feeding this timeline of conflict, and battling it out and duking it out. And for me, it was like the most difficult lesson to learn. But once I learned it, now I can serve in the sense of like I can help create these portals, I can help maneuver them, I can help envision them, so on and so forth. So it's very it's great, beautiful work. It's thankless work in a way, but it's beautiful, beautiful work. And we can all do it together. Like, if you're someone who's like a regular, who's in our group chat, stuff like that, we do it together. So I'm planning to set up more group stuff for that. um, but I think everyone understands the concept now. Um, and that's how it works, And unfortunately, it's rather difficult to pull off, but we will do it. I'm very determined to do it. Um, but yeah, algorithm less on our side, less influential, right? Like less money, stuff like that, because people naturally don't gravitate to this stuff in this timeline, right? Like, those who are unaware, they don't naturally, even the idea of it sounds ridiculous to them. So you can't even sell the idea to like your average person, even if you are equipped with tolerance and open mindedness and love and you can't sell that idea to someone who's unprepared. But if you feel like you're prepared, and I feel like if you're listening in, I feel like you're prepared. Um, make your little quantum spaceship. Now it's crazy because I've got so many people now who are like doing this thing with me. They're like sharing like pics of their homes with me and like in DMs, and I'm really enjoying it. Like you guys are, better interior designers than I am, that's for sure. Um but yeah, I got people like in my DMs like, sending me screenshots of their homes and stuff, and like how like they beautified it, and what great energy is there, and like that's a portal, that's a temple, right? That's a temple in and of itself, and that's going to carry you through the difficult days. And obviously, like, it doesn't have the power of like a collective, you know temple, which is why our ancestors built temples in the first place. That is the primary function of a temple, to maintain coherence with the highest timeline, right? um, Through electromagnetic force, through gravitational force, through sonar wavelengths. Like, that's the big secret behind it. But obviously, we can't go. I can't go and do that, right? Like, again, because when you're going into these timelines, you have less influence, you have less money, you have less everything. So I can't go buy a huge plot of land and build a spend $20 million and build a beautiful temple where people will come and experience the elation of beauty, and form a quantum portal through which we can then take these people into like higher states of being. Like, I can't do that, and this is why this timeline is adventurous and fun, right? Because I have very little to work with, and you have very little to work with, probably, right? But I'll tell you what, the more we do it, and the higher up we go, the more blessings you will start to receive. The greater the blessings will be, because again, the higher timeline collectively we help humanity like jump into, your influence and your blessings will increase. It just naturally occurs, because you're you're not tolerated by the current status quo, but you're very tolerated by the higher status quo. So this is why they say, a lot of people get this teaching wrong as well. This is why we say, don't judge the other, right? Right? Don't cast judgment. And people think it's like we say this because, oh, we shouldn't. It's so bad. It's so mean to cast judgment on others, and you don't know what they're going through. Well, yeah, okay, like that's like the basic version of it. But the truer and far more grandiose version of that truth, and that quote, is that it is inherently foolish to judge another person according to their current situation, because it is inherently foolish to assume, right, um, that they are not uniquely predisposed to to how to say, be equipped with all kinds of blessings and temptations and hardships, right? It's foolish to assume that everyone is on equal grounds, no matter how much the technocratic slash capitalist society wants to make you think that we are all starting this life on equal grounds. That is obviously untrue, right? There are so many different people on this planet, all of them experiencing very like varying degrees of challenges and temptations. So it's not that like don't judge because it's mean to judge someone. It means don't judge because you're literally incapable of judging anyone, because you can't understand the full context of their living. So in this timeline, which is a very low timeline compared to where we were going just like 10 years ago or so, right? The people in power, the people you see who are empowered, are the ones who align with the rules and the rule set of this timeline. And the rule set of this timeline is very conflict based. Yeah, the rule set of this timeline is like the bigger wolf eats the smaller wolf, right? But there's always a bigger wolf, right? So everyone gets eaten. That's that. So obviously, if you don't align with this, you're not going to find mainstream success in the in this timeline, right? Because you are not celebrated in this timeline. So even with your own self, don't give yourself crap for, oh, I should be like so popular. No, no, you can't, right? You can't. Not in in the state of collective thought we're in right now. So if you understand that, you will also understand that your blessings come from a different source. You're not someone who naturally, if you're spiritually inclined, even, you're not someone who naturally will find mainstream success in these lower states of being, because you have to display significant, like severe narcissistic traits, and lack of empathy, and you know all kinds of like deviant behaviors to even get to that point. So, why would you sacrifice your inner peace and well, your highest self, your highest potential to acquire that? So, it's important for you to also note that. Like that's why, these little windows and these narrow portals exist in very subtle places. Like I call them desperate corners, right? They exist in desperate corners. That's why you experience, like, most of the experiencing of like the supernatural, paralogical, irrational things in this timeline is done like on a very individual level. Like you'll experience something that's a little bit out there, but you'll only experience it where you're alone, or where you're with someone who's also high consciousness, or something like that. Like you'll almost never have it on a collective level. So yeah, there you go. It's difficult to maneuver, but it's an adventure. So you should, look forward to it. Anyway, this has gone on for long enough. Build that spaceship, folks, and I will give you like more content on YouTube soon. Um, if you want to support me, you can do so on my Kofi page. It's under my profile. The link. Can buy a face reading session if you want. You can buy the new membership thing that I did if you want. You don't have to, but if you want to support me, you can do it that way. So much love to you all, mm, and hope you have a good one. Bye bye.